There is a city in Gujarat called Morbi, sitting 2,400 kilometers away from Tehran. But when tension spikes in the Middle East, the shockwaves hit Morbi directly. In a matter of days, 400 ceramic factories shut their doors. Thousands of miles away in Haryana, rice mills operating for export dropped to just 10% capacity. 400,000 migrant workers from Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Odisha packed up and returned home because they could no longer afford to eat. As the supply of cooking gas cylinders dried up in the cities, black market prices surged to levels that outpaced a laborer's entire daily income. Without gas to cook food, the cities became uninhabitable for the working class. The disruption triggered immediate concern at the top. On March 11th, Prime Minister Modi addressed the nation, explicitly telling citizens there was no need to panic about LPG supplies. But as the conflict stretched into its second week, the tone changed. The government began holding repeated meetings of the Cabinet Committee on Security, the country's highest decision-making body for national defense. This chart shows exactly why the nation's top security officials were scrambling. India's annual oil import bill sits between $130 and $150 billion. We spend more importing oil from the Gulf than on our entire military defense budget. We import thick, unrefined crude oil, and it has to be processed at massive domestic refineries to be useful. By heating it to different temperatures, we pull three critical lifelines from that crude: LPG, which goes into cylinders for 33 crore Indian kitchens, petrol and aviation fuel for daily transport, and diesel, which powers the heavy trucks moving the entire country's food and factory goods. Natural gas requires a totally separate supply chain. Extracted directly from underground geological deposits, it serves two main purposes in India. It powers our city buses as compressed natural gas, and it is the essential raw ingredient for manufacturing urea, the most widely used agricultural fertilizer in the country. If natural gas supplies freeze, food prices soar. More than half of India's natural gas, and an immense portion of global crude oil, must pass through a single geographic bottleneck, the Strait of Hormuz. It is an incredibly thin sea route, just 40 kilometers wide, separating the oil fields of the Persian Gulf from the open ocean. Bypassing the strait isn't a viable option. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have built overland pipelines to pump oil out to alternate ports, but these pipes can only handle a fraction of the 2 crore barrels that usually flow through Hormuz every single day. The only other major sea exit is the Red Sea, and Houthi militants in Yemen routinely launch drone strikes on commercial cargo ships attempting to use it. And you cannot load this oil onto trucks. A single marine tanker carries 2 million barrels of oil. To replace one ship, you need 100,000 trucks running a continuous relay race through the desert. The math simply fails. The survival of the world's most populated country is trapped within a 40-kilometer strip of saltwater. Iran fully understands its geographic leverage over that saltwater. Using their 1,700-kilometer mountainous coastline, they mask the deployment of fast attack boats, low-cost drones, and naval mines. They have effectively turned international waters into a heavily armed multi-million-dollar toll booth. The global reaction splinters based on internal reserves. The United States faces immense domestic political pressure the second petrol prices rise at the pump, forcing aggressive threats from Washington.
Meanwhile, China has heavily insulated itself by constructing massive natural gas storage facilities in cities like Yangcheng, holding enough supply to power Beijing for months. When Washington asked allies to form a military coalition to aggressively break the Iranian toll booth, India refused to sign on. Instead, Prime Minister Modi initiated direct diplomatic phone calls with the Iranian president, leaning on historical relations to negotiate safe passage for Indian energy vessels. India then backed that diplomacy with hard power. The Indian Navy launched Operation Urja Suraksha, deploying active warships into the Gulf of Oman. As Indian commercial tankers exited the strait, military vessels physically escorted them into the open ocean. India secured its energy flow through a mix of high-level diplomacy and naval escorts, but the mission highlighted a deep strategic vulnerability. When a 40-kilometer stretch of water thousands of miles away can dictate the operational capacity of Indian factories, the nation's energy security rests in hands other than its own. The damage to the Indian wallet continues long after the physical oil is secured. When global tension restricts oil flow, crude prices spike. Because India buys this oil in US dollars, the government has to spend more dollars to keep the lights on. This high demand for foreign currency actively weakens the Indian rupee. That weakened rupee creates a vicious cycle. Institutional investors hate currency instability. In a single month during the conflict, a record 1 lakh crore rupees fled the Indian stock market. Capital leaves the country, the rupee loses more value, and the next barrel of oil becomes even more expensive to import. To stop working-class families from feeling this exact pinch in their kitchens, the government stepped in. By freezing the price of domestic cooking cylinders, they absorbed 28,000 crore rupees in subsidy losses. They burned through federal budget cash just to prevent mass starvation in urban centers. Even if a ceasefire is signed tomorrow, the economic bleeding doesn't stop. Commercial shipping companies still have to buy expensive war risk insurance premiums just to bring vessels near the Gulf. Those inflated premiums get baked into the final delivery cost, permanently raising the price of goods in your local market. You cannot move the Strait of Hormuz, but you can dismantle your reliance on it. In the middle of the crisis, the Indian government began urging citizens to abandon LPG gas cylinders and buy induction heaters. The logic here is simple and vital. Unlike neighboring countries that rely on imported natural gas to run their electrical grids, India has an enormous domestic buffer. 75% of India's electricity comes from coal, which is mined heavily within our own borders. When you plug in an induction stove, you're running on domestic fuel. To completely sever the geographic trap, the next phase relies on massive investments in renewables. By blanketing regions in solar panels and pairing them with utility-scale battery storage, the grid can capture and store its own energy without relying on a single foreign import. The push for electric vehicles and induction power provides a domestic shield. By shifting energy demand away from the Persian Gulf and onto the Indian power grid, the country removes the external fuse that can currently shut down its factories and kitchens at a moment's notice.